The morning of February 19, 1942, began like countless others on the isolated shores of Christmas Island. Sitting alone in the Indian Ocean, nearly 1,500 kilometers from the Australian mainland, the tiny island seemed a world away from the great battles raging across the Pacific. Its handful of soldiers, wireless operators, and civilians were more concerned with the island's phosphate mines than with aircraft carriers or bombers. But on that morning, they witnessed something extraordinary. Looking into the sky, observers noticed wave after wave of military aircraft flying overhead. These weren't the occasional patrol planes that sometimes crossed the region. There were dozens of them. Experienced observers immediately recognized the unmistakable silhouettes of Japanese aircraft. No one on the island knew exactly where they were headed. The men watching from Christmas Island could only guess. They had no radar, no satellite imagery, and no way of seeing beyond the horizon. All they knew was that a massive formation of enemy aircraft had appeared from the northwest before disappearing toward Australia. What they had unknowingly witnessed was one of the largest carrier airstrikes ever assembled. Just beyond the horizon sailed four of Japan's most powerful aircraft carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Hiryū, and Sōryū. Only 10 weeks earlier, these same carriers had launched the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, crippling the United States Pacific Fleet. Now they were preparing to strike Australia. On board were nearly 190 aircraft, fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers, heading toward Darwin. The Australians on Christmas Island immediately reported what they had seen. Wireless operators transmitted messages warning that large numbers of Japanese aircraft were moving southeast. Unfortunately, these reports traveled through a communication system already overwhelmed by the rapid Japanese advance across Southeast Asia. During the previous 2 months, Japan had conquered Hong Kong, invaded Malaya, captured Singapore, attacked the Philippines, and occupied much of the Dutch East Indies. Warnings arrived, but no one fully appreciated what they meant. Many commanders believed the aircraft might simply be conducting reconnaissance or supporting operations against Java. Few imagined an attack of such enormous scale was about to hit Australia's northern coast. While the reports moved slowly through military headquarters, the Japanese strike force continued south at high speed. At dawn, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, who had also commanded the Pearl Harbor attack, gave the order to launch. Aircraft streamed from the four carriers in carefully timed waves. Veteran pilots who had already bombed Hawaii now climbed into the morning sky once again. Many of these men were among the finest aviators Japan had ever trained. They had years of combat experience in China and months of intensive preparation before Pearl Harbor. Their confidence was immense. Their target was Darwin. At the time, Darwin was Australia's most important northern port. It served as a staging base for Allied ships supplying Dutch forces fighting in Indonesia. Fuel depots, ammunition stores, airfields, and shipping crowded its harbor. If the Japanese could cripple Darwin, they would make it far more difficult for Allied forces to resist their advance. Just before 10 a.m., the first warning signs appeared. American fighter pilot Lieutenant Robert Oestreicher spotted incoming aircraft while flying near the city. At first, many observers believed they were American planes returning from Java. Then, the bombs began to fall. Within minutes, Darwin became an inferno. Dive bombers screamed down onto ships anchored in the harbor. Torpedo bombers released deadly weapons into the water below. Fighters strafed airfields, fuel tanks, and anti-aircraft positions. The destruction was devastating. 8 ships were sunk, including the American destroyer USS Peary. More than 20 other vessels were damaged. Airfields were wrecked. Aircraft lined up on the ground were destroyed before they could take off. Fuel installations exploded into towering columns of black smoke visible for kilometers. More than 230 people were killed, although some historians believe the true figure may have been higher. For Australia, it was the largest single attack ever carried out by a foreign power. And it had all unfolded after isolated observers on Christmas Island had watched the attackers fly overhead. The attack shattered Australia's sense of security. Until then, many Australians believed the war would remain distant, fought in Europe or somewhere far across the Pacific. Now, enemy aircraft had bombed Australian soil. Panic spread rapidly. Rumors circulated that an invasion fleet was approaching. Thousands of civilians fled south. Some military units retreated in confusion as communications broke down. Although later investigations found many stories of mass panic exaggerated, there is little doubt that Darwin experienced chaos unlike anything Australians had previously seen. In hindsight, many have asked whether the reports from Christmas Island could have prevented the disaster. The honest answer is probably not. Even if commanders had immediately understood the warnings, Darwin possessed very few fighter aircraft capable of defending the city. Anti-aircraft batteries were limited, radar coverage was almost non-existent, and most ships were anchored in predictable positions. The Japanese enjoyed complete surprise, overwhelming numbers, and highly experienced crews. The warning from Christmas Island was valuable, but it was unlikely to have changed the outcome. Ironically, the island itself would soon become another casualty of Japan's rapid expansion. Only weeks later, Japanese forces occupied Christmas Island after a mutiny by members of the island's Indian garrison resulted in the deaths of several British officers. Japanese troops landed without facing significant resistance and controlled the island for the remainder of the war. The men who had watched the bombers disappear toward Australia now found themselves living under Japanese occupation. Today, Darwin remembers the attack every year. Museums display twisted wreckage recovered from the harbor. Memorials honor those who lost their lives. Divers still visit the sunken remains of ships resting on the seabed, silent reminders of that terrible morning. Yet the story of Christmas Island is often overlooked. It serves as a powerful reminder that history sometimes turns on ordinary people witnessing extraordinary events. A handful of observers standing on a remote tropical island looked into the sky and saw the greatest carrier strike force Australia would ever face. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. They reported what they had seen. But by the time the full significance of their warning became clear, the aircraft had already reached Darwin. Within hours, Australia's war had changed forever. Sometimes history announces itself with speeches, declarations, or headlines, and sometimes it arrives as a distant formation of aircraft crossing the morning sky, seen by a few people on a lonely island who could never have imagined they were watching one of the most important attacks in Australian history.